My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I'm the Executive Director of Rebuild North Bay Foundation. This podcast is specifically designed to bring you people who have been through what maybe you have just gone through or that you are concerned about. I wanted to do this podcast so that I could bring some of the most amazing leaders that I've ever known in my life to you. You may have just experienced a disaster, and you may be looking around and you are dealing with trauma and the shock of it. And you may be wondering, I don't know how to do this part. And so we purposefully made this podcast into different sections and different topics of recovery so that you could pick and choose what would work for you at that time.
Hello, everybody. This is Scott Adams. I want to welcome you to this video interview as a follow-up to the research paper, Disconnected: Understanding Communication System Failures During Disasters. The focus of these videos is to support the policy paper that was funded by Rebuild North Bay Foundation and the United Way of the Wine Country. And these are really intended to help inform various stakeholders about the many dimensions of this problem to foster understanding and create a dialogue with solutions moving forward. Today, we're honored to be speaking with Napa County Supervisor Belia Ramos, who will be discussing a really important element to this problem, and that's the need for government officials to focus on equity and cultural competence. Hello, Supervisor Ramos. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you for having me, Scott. I really appreciate your work into looking at this this struggle that we all have, and the support of Rebuild North Bay to be able to delve in a bit more. You know, I think when we look at communication, when we look at connectedness, it means something different to all of us in the Napa and Sonoma wine countries post the 2017 fires. So I really appreciate your work in this.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. And I think as a veteran of so many different disasters, you really brought a lot of expertise and gravitas to, and insights to the paper and its formation. One of the things that we really wanted to talk to you about is, while the paper covers a really big topic of communication system failures during disasters, it tended to focus on the technical aspects of the problem and how to fix those. But in our initial conversation with you, you raised such an incredibly important element to this problem, and that's not just the channels through which communications are dispatched to our citizens, but the kind and type of communications that are sent to your constituents. And given that, California and Napa County has such a diverse population, we really wanted to dive into, this subject matter a little more with you, and, have you share a little bit more about, like, for instance, how important is it for governments and alerting authorities to think about equity when they're communicating to their constituents during disasters?
You know, when we look at California, where we sit, and that especially as a representative of Napa County and agricultural region, diversity is part of our fabric. But that diversity isn't just even race, right? When you look at a piece of paper and you look at your census demographics, diversity is culture. And when we look at various cultures, it's important for us to understand that our communication has to be culturally competent in order to be well received. And I use the phrase cultural competence in my capacity as a supervisor with my staff and with EOCs especially, to communicate that we need to move beyond accepting translation as sufficient. And cultural competency, really just to touch upon it, really stems from a place of equity in our communication and understanding that not every person is similarly situated to receive that same Nixle message, that same iPause message, that same broadcast and radio message in the same exact way. Words mean different things to different people, and the medium of communication that we use likewise will determine who in fact will receive our messaging. And so it's really important for us when we look at disaster communication, redundancy is the word that we use, right? We want to make sure that a person not just receives a message once, we want them to receive it 2-3 times, because that's how we know we are reaching people. But even if a message arrives at a person, that's the technological part, right? That's our communications. Those are our towers and infrastructure. That's the cellular data plans, the broadband that gets the message to the person. What happens when the message arrives at that person is what actually will impact whether someone is able to survive a disaster or not. And that's where equity comes into play. The way in which we communicate that message, its medium of delivery, the language that is used in that message, that is where we can actually save lives.
Those are so important. And you talked about, you know, to break that down, both translation and medium of delivery. Going to translation first. You shared with me a really interesting example of a mistake in communication during a recent disaster. Can you speak a little bit about what happened there to give our audience a little more context of how important it is to use the right language and not just, you know, do you know, an automated translation of a
Sure.
document written in English?
Sure. So one of the things, Everbridge is, it's used nationwide. Here locally, we use Nixle, which is part of Everbridge, to be able to provide text and email emergency notifications. And especially during the 2017 fires, our subscription of Nixle exceeded our population in the county. It was an incredibly valuable asset for us to deliver that communication. And what we were starting to find during the fires was that Everbridge relies on a Google translation platform to be able to simply click the box and send out that message also in Spanish, because a subscriber can sign up simply by their zip code, or their zip code plus the language that they want to be able to utilize. And so here Spanish is quite prevalent, spoken either as a monolingual language or as a primary bilingual language. And one of the things, it was brought to us that there were some concerns in language. You know, I'll give you one example, not offensive example, which is Old Sonoma Road. Google Translate through Everbridge will translate that over to Sonoma Road, the old part. There is no old part, it's all old because it's the proper name. And so being able to separate out proper names in that automated translation system, not part of the system. So we started finding those things. You can input manually a translation, but as we know, that's a staffing consideration. And sometimes you've got these life or death situations, you want to get the message out. After the fires, we had been working with a number of community groups to really try and get our minds around what is this messaging going to look like, and how do we implement it. And I think that the day that it really struck me as something had to change in the way we did communications was we had a fuel tanker that flipped over on Oakville Grade in the middle of the night, like on a Friday night. And so the Nixle message, I get them in Spanish. because I wanted to really understand, take away my convenience of English is what I mostly communicate in. I wanted to understand what those struggles were in Spanish. And I wake up in the morning, I had messages from my father saying, you need to check your text messages. I've received some calls about an ICSL. And I go and I look at the NICSL, and I click on the link to understand what happened, because it has the English and the Spanish version on the computer-based NICSL. The English version told us to avoid the road, that there was a dangerous condition. And condition, because of the word count, the character count on NICSL, condition had been abbreviated to COND. No problem in English. You can understand that COND is going to be condition. It's a regular type of abbreviation. Flip over to the Spanish side. It says to avoid the road. There was a dangerous, peligroso, condom. It took the abbreviation of COND, thinking it might be a misspelling of condom, and placed that into the Spanish translation. So now imagine the, it rightfully so, was not just the criticism, but the erosion of trust in the communication system that we are providing, and that we are saying, turn to NICSL. We are going to tell you what we know. We are going to help you make informed decisions during dangerous happenings, whether emergencies or disasters. Trust us and trust NICSL. And now we have this one message that goes out. We're not building trust. And that was the moment when I realized I really dug into the communication translation issue and realized there's no human there. It's a translation algorithm. You get what you get. And so we had to proactively decide as a county what measures we were going to take to ensure that the communication that went out was correctly stated. We're starting at that point. So we haven't even reached the next level of cultural competence and the different mediums of communication we need to utilize for the different categories in which people receive their information. We're just starting from ground zero. Can we get our words right? And that's a reflection, a self-reflection we all have to experience to be able to get to that next level.
Well, thank you for sharing that example. And you can see how, how diminishing that can be in terms of establishing trust, as you said. And I was really moved in our initial interview. I think you said you actually took it upon yourself to craft messages in Spanish yourself. And then I believe the county hired a Spanish-speaking employee to craft messages. So, I think, that's a lesson that can be learned for other municipalities when communicating to others, that it's, like you said, not to leave it up to technology, but to bring the human element and that empathy and understanding to the process.
We did more than that, Scott. We immediately engaged Latinx advocates. We got everyone in the room. We brought our bilingual staff into the room, and we worked up a plan of how we are going to execute at various levels. Immediate threat, it's an English message, and at the bottom it says Spanish is coming. A medium type threat, like you need to start avoiding an area, we're going to act immediately and get a Spanish translation at that time. In addition, for standard types of alert messages like road closures or a water main break, working with the community and with Latinx advocates, we created templates, if you will. Templates for each of the partner agencies that might be using Nixle to say, this road is closed at this time, avoid the area. So that we did not find ourselves in a situation of being incapacitated to communicate because of bilingual staffing issues that can occur from time to time.
Navigating the recovery process after a fire is challenging, particularly with the additional issues caused by COVID-19. Fannie Mae is here to help. If you live in a FEMA-declared disaster area, you can request free assistance from our Disaster Response Network. Fannie Mae, in partnership with Maury Management International's Project Porchlight, launched the Disaster Response Network in 2018. This program uses HUD-approved counselors to offer support. These counselors have been specially trained as disaster coaches. They address the challenges homeowners and renters face when recovering from a disaster. There's no charge for their services. The goal of the Disaster Response Network is to help people return to pre-disaster normal as quickly as possible. Clients are matched with a coach who work with them one-on-one throughout their recovery. In the initial conversation with clients, coaches review the status of the homeowner's recovery process, including current challenges, decisions that need to be made, and immediate long-term goals. They discuss topics like income and expenses, insurance, housing, credit or debt challenges, as well as aid or other assistance programs that may be available. This may include FEMA applications and Small Business Administration, or SBA, loans. The coach helps the client plan and prioritize the next steps for their recovery. Moving forward, the coach continues to be there for the client, reaching out to them regularly, at least monthly, but more often when needed, for up to 18 months' time. These regular check-ins provide the client the opportunity to ask questions, get help tackling challenges, and keep things moving as they work through their recovery. It's also where coaches can help identify new recovery assistance or grants that have become available, strategize new next steps for recovery, and talk through difficult decisions or priorities. One of the key ways coaches assist Disaster Response Network clients is by helping intervene when something has gone awry. Coaches will, with the clients on the line, call insurance companies to adjust their claims when costs exceed initial estimates, or call the client's creditors to request payment relief. The Disaster Response Network's approach ensures survivors have a personal financial expert working with them throughout their recovery. By helping minimize the financial impact of a disaster, survivors can recover more quickly. To get confidential disaster relief assistance, call the Disaster Response Network at 877-833-1746. Once again, that is 877-833-1746. Or visit knowyouroptions.com/relief for more information.
Wow. That's a really important point for folks to get and to learn from you folks in Napa about. Wanted to switch to mediums of communication. Another thing that you shared in our initial talk was the when it comes to meeting people where they are, and this is under the auspices of cultural competence, is really understanding with the diverse populations, some, immigrant communities, countries of origin, maybe having a lack of trust in government, that you had a really interesting way of kind of breaking down how you and the folks in Napa think about communicating with different segments of that population. Could you speak to us about that a little bit?
So I'll take that in two parts. So I think one of the things that's really important for us to recognize, not just in Napa County, but California and the United States as a whole, we are a country of immigrants. And so what that means is that you bring another part of yourself, a culture with you. into America. And you feel that each and every day in California and in Napa County. And so with that comes those experiences that they have had with government. When you look at especially Central American countries, if that is the place of origin, your prior experience has bring with you that civil unrest, the lack of confidence of not knowing who's in charge and when, because of civil wars that have happened. You bring with you an ideal that the government is like the kingpin, and you're just lucky to be there, right? This distrust that comes, oh, well, they're in charge. Then there's the other part that you have other cultures, especially, for a lot of Mexican immigrants, where they have had incidents of the president and various governors who have not been transparent, who have given the people a great deal of mistrust in government and in finance and in communication. This also happens in certain Arab nations with the distrust in media and how government is portrayed. We have to accept that that is the starting point, and that for some people, what the government says is not a well-received message. And I'll say to you, Scott, it was very hard for me to accept you are now the government and people aren't going to trust you. And so that I needed to develop partners that could help me distribute that message. I can share with you that establishing those partners, which is, it's been labeled as the promotores model, in communication, is you take those trusted partners, you take the priests, you take those nonprofit agencies as family resource centers, and now in light of COVID-19's pandemic, I can now add vineyard managers to the list of my trusted promotores. So how it works now, and to effectuate the dissemination of information in a way that a flyer, a nixle, a Facebook message will never get to a certain group, a certain part of our immigrant population. I can turn to those people and say, here's this video I'm texting you that I want you to send out. Here's this message I want you to read out. Can you distribute this flyer? And I send a link. That's the promotores model. That is, it's grassroots. It's how we know what grassroots is, but it is in light of a cultural difference. And I say cultural because that brings me to how people receive information. So if I were to categorize myself, I am first generation. I'm the daughter of immigrants, born here, and I've lived this dual American life that with a Mexican culture. I am biculture. I am on Zoom. I know how to work it. I am tech savvy. Not incredibly tech savvy, but sufficiently, right? That if I am going to receive a message by Nixle, Facebook, it's going to get to me. And I speak 2 languages. Then we go to the next category, which is, I would say, tech savvy, because we can now, it's not 100% proof, but many people have cell phones that have the texting technology, and a lot of them also have web-based services on their phone. But they may only be comfortable communicating in one language. So I would call them tech-savvy monolingual. Mm-hmm. And then we have people who would be like my grandpa. No, my grandpa is probably monolingual tech savvy. He's got himself a nice iPhone. If we go to the next category, maybe the cell is just a phone. Maybe it's still an analog, or maybe there's no cell phone, and it's your grandmas, your grandpas, or those people who their experience didn't require that they reach that next level of technology. So all of a sudden, we have one message in English that we start with and that we push out through Nixle and Facebook. But as I try and get it over into a different language, I have to now be careful with my words, make sure there's a human checking the words so that Google doesn't pull another dangerous condition on us. And now we've got to look at these three different mediums in which people receive their communication. So the tech-savvy bicultural person, they're going to get my English message. But the tech-savvy monolingual person, I need to make sure it's in their language and appropriately worded. And then we go to the non-tech savvy. Now I need to go use those connections, those promotores, those trusted partners in the community to get them to give my message. One message now gets disseminated in 4 different ways if we want to do this right, if we want to truly meet people where they're at and to embrace communication from a place of equity, from a place of empathy, and to be effective.
Got it. That is so important and such like relevant and pertinent information for your peers around the state. I mean, one of the central themes of our paper was that there's this new normal out there and that disasters are going to be just, the course of life now with climate change, et cetera. I guess here's the question I want to ask you as we close, and that is, you were really clear that because of, Napa's experience with disasters on an almost annual basis, that you've been able to learn, you and your peers from one disaster to the next. For those communities that haven't yet experienced disasters, but potentially may, what message would you give to them about preparation?
The greatest one is, we need to start from the position, from a place of humility, of understanding that with ever-changing situations, we're not always going to get it right, and we can always learn. So I say start with your partner advocates. Start, for me, that's the Latinx advocates, our Family Resource Center. Start there and ask a really hard question. How can I do better? And most importantly, be willing to listen and learn from the feedback you get. I've had to do it most recently with COVID-19. There have been some hard truths that we've had to pivot. It's my 2020 word of the year. It's time to pivot in communications, and we do, and we respond each and every time. I think it's really important to reach out, have a relationship, starting with your promotores, and develop who those promotores are, those trusted partners. Because if you look at the way in which I categorize these groups of tech-savvy, bilingual, tech-savvy, monolingual, they're going to get something. Who is not is the monolingual, non-tech-savvy person. That is your vulnerable group in terms of communication. That is who you need to reach out to, and your trusted partners can help you do that. So form those relationships. Try and do it when we don't have a disaster. That's the best time to actually form those relationships. And I offer myself up to anyone. I'm happy to talk about this subject with anyone. As you can tell, it's near and dear to my heart. I get to live it and breathe it each and every day, and COVID-19 is giving us a new experience to be able to continue to learn from what it means to be culturally competent in our communication.
Wow. Well, Napa County Supervisor Belia Ramos, thank you so much for your contribution to the paper, for your insights on cultural competence, and just for your service to the community. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Scott.
We created the podcast How to Disaster to show you the breadth and depth of humanity in the midst of this really terrible thing that happened. We are bringing you humanity. That's the greatest resource you'll have in a disaster. And that's something that you learn in a disaster, is that when everything else burns down, that humanity doesn't burn down. And this is going to be tough. It's going to be hard, and that it's entirely possible. So welcome to How to Disaster, and thank you for giving us your time.